Welcome to Talking to Myself, where I do a whole lot of talking to myself and talking to others. I'm Carol L. Paur. Wait, you probably wonder, why does she always say Carol L. Paur? Because there are other Carol Powers out there, and I don't want anyone getting confused. Anyhow, I'm the author of Is a Snora Snores, a middle grade fantasy about a baby who snores so loudly she shatters glass. She also throws people into fits of hysterical laughter. Do you know what that means? Have you ever been tickled? Tickled so hard that you can't stop laughing? Well, that is what Is a Snora's snoring does to people all around her. They have to wear earplugs or they'll start laughing hysterically. Because of her wild and dangerous snoring, King Frederick banishes her from the kingdom. In the forest Petiole, she meets some talking creatures, like a giant missing a whole bunch of teeth, a dragon who won't share his name, a slug who is a king, a mouse who brews terrible tea, and a wise old heron. You know what a heron is, don't you? A bird. His name is Horace, and he teaches Is a Snora math. Last month, I announced that I have a new book coming out. It is a young adult novel, and the title is Early Summer. The publication date is November 2022, and the publisher is Orange Blossom Publishing. I want to tell you something about talking to myself. It's organic, if you haven't figured that one out already. It's farm to table. It's fresh and sometimes a bit grainy and imperfect. That's okay with me. Are you okay with organic? Last month, I interviewed Jamie from Seeds of Hope. I hope you were as encouraged by her and her organization as much as I was. Sometimes we think the world is all bad, but Jamie and all the people at Seeds of Hope give me hope that there are great people doing great things in our world. Recently, my daughter Monica asked at dinner time, what was the meaning of life? Is it just to go to work, come home, and eat supper and go to bed? She didn't say those exact words, but you get the idea. After that conversation, I had the good fortune of meeting a fellow writer via email. Her name is Rochelles Melander, and she's written several books. Her latest one is called Mightier than the Sword. Today we're going to talk to Rochelle about her book and a lot of other great things. I hope Monica is listening so she'll learn there is a whole lot more to life than going to work, coming home, eating supper, and going to bed. Thank you, Rochelle, for coming on the show. I read somewhere that you wrote your first book at age 7. What do you think you learned from that experience?
Yes, I wrote my first book at 7. It was called Halloween in the Ghost House. And when I look at it in my own personal library, it's not available anywhere else. I can tell that I did the covers and then dictated the story to my grandmother, who wrote it down. And it really takes a couple of kids and their friends through a spooky Halloween day. I think what I learned is that it was important for me to tell stories, that people wanted to hear my stories. I was fortunate to have parents and grandparents and maybe even siblings who wanted to listen to what I had to say. And as I grew, I started writing more books and creating plays, and my friends and I would put them on. And so I think I learned that stories were an important way to convey what I thought, or to convey my truth.
All right, Rochelle, let's jump forward a few years. I read somewhere that you said you had lost confidence in your writing. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, I'm not sure if it was so much that I lost confidence in myself, or that I lost confidence in that whole idea of sharing writing with other people. In high school, I didn't get into college prep English, and that was really frustrating for me because I desperately wanted a mentor. And I had a rough, I did really well in high school writing, but I had a really rough college comp class where, I started out getting C's, and I thought of myself as a good writer, but my teacher didn't think of myself or think of me as a good writer. And so I was really frustrated by that.
So, here you are, a successful writer, but you just mentioned that you had a teacher in college who didn't like your writing and you were getting C's. How do you tell students today who might be struggling in their English class or their creative writing classes? How do you get past maybe a teacher who doesn't like your writing or not getting great grades?
So I work with students like this all the time. I think what happens in school is that students are asked to write some very specific kinds of writing, essays, informative documents, and so forth. And there's a lot of expectations in terms of format and mechanics. And although, I think teaching has come a long way, and there's a lot of work with creativity and idea creation and idea, thinking about how you're going to express your ideas and then organizing them. I still work with students who are very frustrated by that format and very worried about the mechanics. And so they can barely get to their creativity because they're so fearful they're going to spell something wrong, or they're not going to have the right amount of information in their introductory paragraph. And so what I say to them is, write your story. No matter what anybody else says, no matter how anybody else critiques you, write your story.
Some people might say that there has to be some formal training or some guidelines to writing. So do you see any value in critiques?
It's important to take whatever you can from the critiques you're given, because that's information and that can help you grow. But don't let that shut you down. Think about what you want to say, find out what your story is, and then say it. And if you can't say it well in the way you're having to say it at school, then perhaps it's important for you to find a different venue. I talk about a young woman named Sunita in my book who was living in Afghanistan, and she wasn't doing great in school, right? If she was even in school, because she was working at cleaning places. And while she was cleaning one night, she heard a rap song and she just absolutely fell in love with it. And that kind of was her call that, oh, I could write something like this. And that format allowed her voice to emerge. So look for the format that's really going to work for you, because the world needs your story.
Did you always want to be a writer? Also, I have a lot of people, when they find out I'm a writer, tell me they want to write a book or they want to be a writer, but they have jobs. Well, I noticed you have done a lot of things in your life. How did that all impact your writing?
So I think I've always wanted to be a writer. I shouldn't say it quite like that. I've always wanted to write. I never really believed when I was young that I could be a writer. So my first job was being a minister, and I had to write a lot in that job. I had to write a sermon every week, and then I had to stand up and deliver that sermon to people. And that was some of the scariest writing I ever did, because I had to actually stand up and kind of own my words. And yet I really liked it. It required a lot of research, and I kind of got into that rhythm. And so that's kind of when I thought, I'd really like to do this, but I'd like to have some other topics. After I was a minister, I was a life coach. So I went back to school and got a certificate to become a life coach. And then I did probably 700 hours, 800 hours of coaching, and am now certified as a life coach and in the process of being certified as an ADHD coach. And all of these things have helped me be a writer.
Rochelle has a lot more to tell us, but right now I want to get into her latest book, Mightier Than the Sword. We will have a special Talking to Myself extra with Rochelle Melander, so she can tell us all about Dream Keepers. Do you remember Monica asking about the meaning of life? Well, I think this book has a lot of answers. Rochelle, tell me about Mightier Than the Sword and why you wrote it.
So Mightier Than the Sword, Rebels, Reformers, and Revolutionaries Who Changed the World Through Writing, is a middle grade social justice book that tells the stories of historical and contemporary writers, activists, scientists, and leaders who use writing to make a difference in their lives and the world.
You say it's a middle grade book, but who is your target audience?
I think it will appeal to kids who are frustrated by their inability to be heard or to make a difference in the world. And my goal for Mightier Than the Sword is that it would give these kids access to some tools that would help them to make a difference in the world.
Let me explain to the listeners that Mightier Than the Sword is non-fiction, which means it's true and not make-believe. Rochelle, once you found a publisher, how long did it take to write your book, and where might people buy it?
It took 6 months to research and write the book. The book can be found wherever books are sold. But if you want to get a signed book, you can get that from Boswell Book Company, and you can order that online. And I'm happy to personalize it to you and sign it. And I usually include a bookmark and a sticker.
There it is, folks. Another episode of Talking to Myself with special guest Rochelle Melander. Let's give her a round of applause. Thank you, Rochelle, for your time and your expertise. Monica, if you're listening, you may find more meaning in your life if you learn to help others and work to change the world for the better, like the people in Rochelle's book. Remember to check out Talking to Myself Extra, where Rochelle talks about her writing program, Dream Keepers. Go to RochelleMelander.com for Rochelle's blog and her website. It's my birthday this Saturday. How many of you listeners were born in October? I hope you had or will have a fantastical birthday. Thank you for listening. Cheers!